I'd like to give you Franklin W. from Olive Branch, Mississippi.
Thank you. I appreciate you calling me a gentleman. Because a long time people didn't call me that. You are a beautiful bunch of diseased people. Over 6,000 white eyeballs looking back at me, not a red one in the bunch. I want to say something before I get started talking. Many years ago, I told my wife Eloise that if she would stick with me, that I'd take her to the top of the mountain. And little did I know that the top of the mountain was a desert Roundup at Palm Springs, California. So I know where's the beef. And I'm real grateful to be here. You know, ever since Dr. Bob made his last talk at the International in Cleveland in 1950, he said more in a few words than I can say in a lifetime, I think. And one of the things he said was, let's watch that erring tongue. And you know there hadn't been any gossip since then, right? But I heard this. I heard that old Mike R., and I don't see him. Some of us are sick on others. But I understand Mike's got over 30 years of undetected drinking. And I heard when he was a slow learner. And when he really got ready to get down to brass knuckles on this thing, he went to his sponsor and said, I want to take that third step, and I want to take it right. So his sponsor had him to read the third step prayer. And then he had Mike to offer it. And Mike said, God, I offer myself to thee to do with me and build with me as I will. And God interrupted and said, what an order, I can't go through with it. And I heard this about that judge that talked last night. I've known him a long time. He and his wife always had a cat. And they had a big old tomcat that they called Tom. And the old Tom didn't like the judge. Wouldn't have anything to do with him. In fact, he wouldn't sleep with him. He slept with the judge's wife. And the tomcat had one bad habit. He snored. So she took him to the veterinarian, and he says, no problem. Said, you go home, get your blue ribbon and tie it on his private, and he won't snore anymore. And sure enough, it worked. Well, 2 or 3 days later, the old judge comes stumbling in. Now, don't get ahead of me. So he falls across the bed and immediately starts snoring. So she said, if it works for Tom, maybe it'll work for the judge. So she got to looking for a blue ribbon, and she couldn't find one, but she found a red one. She tied it on him. The next morning, about 6:30, the old judge came to, and he looked down and saw that red ribbon, looked over at Tom and saw that blue ribbon. And he said, Tom, I don't know where we went, nor what we done last night, but we must have done good. Said we won first and second prize. Now that we got the spiritual side of the program over, we can get on with the business at hand. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Franklin Williams. Hi. By the grace of God, to fellowship with men and women like you, and because this program wakes. It hadn't been necessary for me to take a drink today, and for this I am most grateful. Not as grateful as I should be, but as grateful as I'm capable of being at this time. I certainly want to thank Elsa Fay, anyone else who is responsible for me being here and allowing my wife, Eloise, to attend. This has been a great experience for us. We know a good many of you. We've met you at other places. Many of you have been down in our area. So I really thank you for letting us be a part of this thing. It's really fantastic to see my old buddy Chuck and Elsie. I've known them for a long time. Don't you worry about old Chuck. He's a fighter, and he's prepared himself to be of maximum service to God and the people about him. And I think God has some more work for you to do, old buddy. And I hope to see you many. I want to thank Bob D. for the extended tour that he took us on Thursday morning. And I want to thank, sometimes can't remember. I want to thank Bunnis and Spencer, our host and hostess, for being so kind to us. They took us up on the tramway yesterday, and we've had meals with them several times. You know, I've been thinking since I've been here about a statement that we use down south a lot, that the South's going to rise again. And we got 4 speakers here from the South. So we're going to improve your AA out here yet. Just have patience. I mentioned that I'm an alcoholic, and that tells you a whole lot about me. I'm also a real alcoholic. And that term is referred to many times in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you don't know whether you're a real alcoholic or not, you study that doctor's opinion, then turn to page 21 in our textbook, along about the middle of the page where it says, now what about the real alcoholic? And if you read about the next 2 pages, I think you can determine whether or not you are a real alcoholic. I'm also an arrested alcoholic. I've been arrested many, many, many times. I don't truthfully know how many times I've been arrested. I wish I'd kept up with it, but I didn't know it was going to be a thing of social prestige when I got to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The text of my sermon this morning is going to be to keep it simple and follow directions. This is hard for me to do. Oh, it was, it still is. I'll louse up a 2-car funeral. I just don't follow directions, and I don't keep anything simple. But in order to tell you how I am making some progress in this area, I'll have to bring in my sponsor. I can call his last name David Gates, because he's gone on to the big meeting. And I never want to talk without talking about sponsorship, because basically I remind myself of what I, as a sponsor, am supposed to do. And another thing, I think if there's a weak link in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm convinced there is, it is in sponsorship. I think these new people coming in now don't have the same shot at it as I had. And there wasn't any way for me to miss with the sponsor that I had. I think there are 2 ways to try to work this program. One is by yourself with a big book, and the other is with a sponsor. Now, I don't think I am qualified to be a sponsor unless I have applied the steps of this program to my daily life. Why do I say this? How is someone who hadn't taken the 4th step going to be able to tell me how to take the 4th step? You can't tell something that you hadn't had an experience in. We got an old boy back home says you can't no more teach what you ain't learned and you can come back from where you ain't been. So I think I need to get to work on these steps. I'll try to tell you how David sponsored me. He was a unique little cuss, and I really hated him to begin with. Now, I don't know whether anybody else had the same experience coming into AA as I did. The man who was contacted to make a call on me had me to come over to his house the night before the meeting. His wife was also an alcoholic, and they called in David. See, they kind of sublet me. And before I ever went to my first meeting, David said, "I'm your sponsor." I said, "What is a sponsor?" He said, "You will find out. Just have patience." And I said, "How did you get to be my sponsor? I haven't even been to a meeting." He said, "We heard about you, and we had a meeting, and we drew straws, and I lost." Now, that's how this love that we have in this thing, how I was introduced to it. David took me to a meeting every night for a long time. And the first number of meetings he took me to, he spoke. I said, "David, don't anybody else in AA talk except you?" He said, "Nobody you need to hear." He soon told me, says, "I can't take you to any more meetings because you get dependent on me." And said, "This is a program where you do not get to have dependence on people, but in a power greater than yourself. I'll see you at such and such a meeting tomorrow night." I said, "David, you know I don't have any wheels. I don't have any money for a streetcar. You know I can't get there." He said, "We find walking helps. We'll see you there." So I was afraid not to go because he was the only person that would take up any time with me, and occasionally he'd spring and buy me a meal. So I had to go along with him. So he took me out there in Memphis one night. Incidentally, I'm a member, and I think all of us need to identify ourselves as being a member. And I think if you don't belong to a group, you're not a member. Now, the book don't say this, but I say this. I belong to the Quonset group in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I came in. And incidentally, I came in January of 1956. And I got sober in October of 56. I did a little research to come after I came in. I also attend on a regular basis Olive Branch group at Olive Branch, Mississippi. Now, I think these are the best two groups in the world. And as my wife says, if you don't think your group is the best group in the world, for God's sake, don't go somewhere else and louse up that group. Stay where you are. Set up the chairs, clean up the coffee cups, clean out the ashtrays, and make your group the best group in the world. So he took me out to this. Incidentally, I've told you, some of you can't count, so I'll tell you how many years that is. 27 years and a little less than 8 months. Now, the only reason I'm telling you this is because I'm bragging. Now, my mother passed away over 2 years ago with over 92 years of continuous sobriety. And she never mentioned it. David, he's always telling me what I must do. You must do this, you must do that. I said, Alan tells me there ain't no must in this program. Take this thing cafeteria style. He said, for your information, the word must is in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, 74 times. But this must is not in the big book, but is a must for you. Said, rarely have we seen a person stay sober who continues to drink. So you must not swallow any of that stuff. I didn't know you wasn't supposed to drink. He took me out to this meeting that night, and he said, now this is a closed meeting. But I didn't know what a closed meeting was, but I wasn't going to ask David. I said, you going to talk? He said, no, everybody's going to talk. Am I going to talk? He said, if they don't run out of time, they might call on you. Well, I beamed, because having this keen alcoholic mind that I had, and being so highly intelligent, I had analyzed this program and had found that we new drunks coming in were more intellectual, and we didn't need those 12 steps. All we needed was 5 of them, and I had eliminated 7 of the steps. And I thought these people needed to know about that. So I got out of the car and started. He said, come here and sit your behind down. I want to give you some direction. He said, if they call on you, he believed in action. When you said something, get on your feet. He said, you stand up, you tell them you're an alcoholic, you remember your name's Franklin Williams, you remember the concert group, and then sit your behind down. Said, you done told them people all you know. I said, David, I thought. He said, oh, no. Said, that's the worst thing in the world that a new member of Alcoholics Anonymous can do is think. Said, your best thinking got you where you are today. We'll do your thinking for a year. And if at the end of that year we think you can think, we'll tell you you can think. But don't you dare think. I told him one day, I said, David, you know I'm broke. He's always telling me, say, you got to study that big book. Study that big book. It's a textbook. You got to study it. I said, David, you know I can't buy a book. I was unemployed for a long time, and I didn't have anything. And he says, finally, you know, I think you got to talk to an alcoholic at the level of his or her understanding. And he talked to me at the level of my understanding. He used profanity, my native tongue. And he called me an ugly name that I won't repeat here in this mixed audience. But he says, you so-and-so, you hadn't forgotten how to steal. You go out and steal you a big book. And by the time you get on to it, we got a step in this program whereby you can make amends for it. He said, action is the key word, and that may be the action for you. I said, yeah, David, it's easy for you people to stay sober. You got wives, you got nice jobs, you got all this. David, I read to him for 5 years out of the big book before I found out he could read. And I had to explain things to him. And he was real slow to catch on. I'd had to explain some of them many times. But I consented to do it because the poor little fellow was trying to stay sober. And he'd take me around to places, and as I say, occasionally he'd spring for a meal. So I took up a lot of time with the poor little fellow. So he said he knew where everything was in the big book. He turned to page 98 along the middle of the page on the left-hand side, said, read me that. It says, wife or no wife, job or no job. Our sobriety does not depend on others, but in our willingness to trust God and a clean house. And then he pointed over on the opposite page, 99, and said, read that. And then he flipped to page 100 and said, read that. And then he said, what does it say? I said, David says the same thing. He said, I know it. Said, Bill figured some cat like you is going to come along, you'd miss it on page 98. But you're bound to see it on 99 or 100. Now, David was a very unique person, I think, in Alcoholics Anonymous. He, like Chuck, had a sixth sense. He could tell when something was bothering you. And he knew when to listen, and he knew when to knock me down. Dr. Tebow wasn't the first one that thought about deflation of ego at depth. I think David was in on that deal. He really knew how. But he walked with me through these steps. He explained them to me and showed me how to do it. And not only did he show me, but he did his steps with me. And I'll always be grateful to David. I think we get what we're supposed to get in this program, and I don't think any other sponsor could have knocked me down and dealt with me in the manner in which David did. I can sum up this whole ball of wax, as far as I'm concerned, with 6 words. And I do this in a matter of simplicity. Trust God, clean house, and help others. Now, where did I get this? I get this from a textbook called Alcoholics Anonymous that's taught me all I know about living. In the 11th chapter, the last series of sentences and words, abandon yourself to God as you understand God, admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you have found and join us, and surely you will meet some of us as you trudge your road to happy destiny. And then didn't Bill say, let's burn into the consciousness of every new man that he too can get sober if he trusts God and clean house. And then didn't Bill say that the surest immunity against not drinking is working with others? So trust God, clean house, and help others. And this is still meaningful to me, because I use this every day when I start my meditation, and I just don't say those words. I think about it. I know what I'm talking about, and I meditate about it. So it's still beneficial. He used to tell me, he says, surrender, the most important thing in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got so tired of hearing that. One day I said, David, how in the devil do you surrender? He said, I don't know. I said, how you expect me to know how if you don't know how and somebody don't tell me? He said, nobody can tell you how to surrender. He said, it's just something that comes from within. He said, near as I can explain it to you, if you live long enough, one of these long nights or one of these days when alcohol no longer does anything for you, and you can't get drunk, and you can't get sober, you're going to fall. You may fall to your knees and call on a power greater than you that you do not understand and ask for help. And said, as near as I can tell you, that's what surrender is. He said, you try to think of something real simple, and that shouldn't be any problem for you, that you can relate to surrender. And I immediately thought about when I was in college that we had an old boy from Sullivan's Hollow. You don't know where that is, but it's a rough section of Mississippi. And old Red McGinnis' mother was a Sullivan, and he was tough. And the more I tell it, the bigger Red gets. But well as I remember, he is well over 6 feet tall, well over 200 pounds, had the longest arms any man I ever saw. They came down to his knees, and his wrists were way along up here. And I smarted off to Red out in the little old store there on the campus that day. Good many people in there, and they started laughing. And I turned around to laugh with them. And I never turned around again, because every time I'd try to get up, he'd knock me back down. And I never laid a hand on Red McGinnis, and he darn near killed me. Now, that was over 50 years ago. If Red McGinnis had come in this room now, ain't no way in the world I'd say anything smart to Red McGinnis. I completely and unconditionally surrendered to Red McGinnis. Now, it wasn't until I had a Red McGinnis surrender to alcohol that I had any success in this, and a Red McGinnis surrender to God. This is still beneficial to me. David taught me to talk to myself. He says that it's not the big Franklin that gets you into trouble, it's the little Franklin. And when he comes up with some of these smart deals for you to do, the two of you go over in the corner and count yourselves, and you have a surrender to God. Well, this happens many times in my life. And I call little Franklin and tell him we're going over in the corner, and we're going to get down on our knees and have a Red McGinnis surrender to God. Now, I think little Franklin knows what I'm talking about. I sure know what I'm talking about. It is still beneficial to me. I don't talk much about drinking because there's not a whole lot in the big book about drinking. I started drinking when I was 16 years of age, and I drank for 29 years until I was 45 years of age. I was an alcoholic. In retrospect, I can see that. I was an alcoholic from the first drink that I took because I drank compulsively and I blacked out. I've been strapped down to the bed seeing these peculiar things. And social drinkers, as I understand it, don't do that. As I told you, I blacked out on that very first drunk. And I don't think social drinkers do that. So I know all of the loneliness, the feeling of not being needed, the feeling of not being wanted, that terrific guilt. David said, I didn't have any guilt. He says, I never was sorry until I was caught. I know that remorse, and I know that fear, that terrific fear that I think dominates every active alcoholic. So that's about all that I'm going to say about drinking. I'd rather tell you a whole bunch that I have learned and am learning about how to live, because Bill says this is a design for living. And I've gotten enough of it to really want all of it that I can get. I'm a pig about this program. I want as much of it as I'm capable of getting. And thank God today I know what to do in order to get this. It's just a matter of me becoming willing and me asking God to make me a little bit more willing to get honest. Now, I'll talk a good deal about honesty. And when I talk about honesty in this program, I'm not talking about cash register honesty. I'm talking about void of self-deception. I was a past master at deceiving myself. And I had to pray many times for this relieve me of the bondage of self that's in the third step. And this is a terrifically important part of my program. Why did I come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? This is a suggested program, and a judge suggested that I come. He gave me an alternate plan. I could go to the penal farm. And you know I had to weigh this situation very carefully before I decided to grace you with my presence. But let me back up a minute. I'm especially glad, as I mentioned earlier, that my wife Eloise could come. And I'd like at this time for Eloise to stand and you see who my present wife is. Eloise in the past hadn't gotten to go to as many of these things as I have because she works. And I try not to do anything to interfere with that gal's work. But I want it clearly understood that that broad don't have to work. She can go naked and starve to death if she wants to. That's a decision she has to make. Decisions are bad for me. I had to make a decision before I came up here whether to go to the bathroom or not. And right now I made the wrong decision. Eloise has over 25 years of continuous sobriety. Of course, she was able to get that in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't remember years, but maybe 15 years ago, somewhere in that area, neighborhood, she switched over and came to Al-Anon. She says to learn to live with me. And I can really understand that, because things were real bad at our house. We didn't have a home. We had a house. We couldn't communicate. We reacted to everything that either one of us said. There just wasn't any communication. Eloise had a little 10-year-old daughter when we married, and that daughter grew to hate me. And she used to shake her fist in my face and say, "You're not my daddy and you don't have a thing in the world to do with me." And you know what I did? I reacted. Well, a very close friend of ours in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, an Al-Anon named Singy, quietly said to Eloise, "You need to go to Al-Anon." Now, Eloise don't jump up and do something on the spur of the moment. She's in the 18th year of a 14-day diet now. So she had to think about it. But she did go. And she is real active in the Olive Branch Al-Anon group. She's a tough sponsor. She believes in conference-approved literature. She goes right down the line on Al-Anon, and she is one heck of a Al-Anon. Now, as a result of Eloise coming into Al-Anon, and me possibly doing a little bit more about my program, our house has become a home. And Eloise and Mickey are the best two friends I have. And Mickey now lives only 6 miles from us. I go out there a lot of Sunday mornings when I'm not out holding services like this. And I have coffee with Mickey and Bob. And many times she'll walk me to the car and she'll put her arm around my waist and said, "Franklin, you're the only daddy I have and I love you." Now, this could not have happened without the fellowships of Al-Anon and Alcoholics Anonymous. And I am just awed at the things that have happened to the three of us as a result of these programs. But lest you Al-Anons feel too smugly, you remember we drunks got you where you are today. And don't you forget it. All right, I came to this program waking people, and that's the reason for 9 months it didn't wake. And then I got on the drunk that is the most important drunk I ever got on. It was the one that got me to my knees. And I didn't suffer as much physically on that drunk as I had on many drunks, I don't think. But it was the one. I think it takes what it takes for each and every one of us. And that is the one that brought me to my knees. Now, before I got on my knees, I had been around you people for 9 months, coming to just enough meetings to let my ex-wife know I was coming, to let the judge know, to let certain people know that I was trying to con out of some money and out of a job. And things got so bad, I reached this point where alcohol would no longer do anything for me or to me, and I thought I'd end my life. And I stole a piece of plastic hose and I borrowed an automobile, and stealing was a way of life with me. And I wrote the farewell note. My sponsor, David, had given me a yellow legal pad to take my inventory on, and that's where I wrote my last will and testament. I said, "You can have everything. I'm going on." And I don't know what all I wrote, a bunch of mess. And I don't know about you when you're drinking, but I just love to cry when I was drinking. And I was staying in a garage apartment as gratis of a friend, and they had an old Victrola in there with a horn coming out, and you had to wind it up. She had a lot of old country music, and she had Al Jolson's Sonny Boy. And I just loved to cry by that. And I'd put that record on, start writing on my will, and I'd start crying. About midway of the record, while the thing had run down, I'd have to run over there and crank it up again. And I think I'd just slow my crying down to keep time with the music. And finally, I wrote so much and cried so much, the bottom of that page got moist, and I drew an arrow up to the top and said, "See next page." And I cried as much as I could cry, and I went on out to the car to end it all. And a peculiar thing happened. I got thirsty. I'd been on wine a number of years then, And I thought, what a cruel thing to do, to leave this world and leave that little spider of wine behind. And I went back in there to polish it off. And a peculiar thing happened. I passed out. Now, I didn't come to, I waked up. And there's a difference. Around 1 or 1:30, the early morning of October 15th, 1956. And my whole life passed before me. And I saw things in a different perspective than I had ever seen them. And I no longer blamed people and conditions for the shape I was in. I knew that blame was with me. And even though I'd been around you for 9 months with a closed mind, I remembered some things you said. And I knew where the solution was. And I fell to my knees. And for the first time in my adult life, I said a honest and sincere prayer. And I have never, I mean never, heard of anyone uttering a prayer in desperation and in sincerity that wasn't answered. And mine was answered. I didn't immediately get to be president of AA, but things happened the way they were supposed to happen. And while on my knees, I became convinced of the first 2 steps, and I took the 3rd step. And I don't think, if you're ready, I don't think it takes very long. I admitted there was absolutely no way I could drink and not get into trouble. I was powerless over alcohol. Lack of power was my dilemma. I had done the things I hadn't intended to do, and I'd left undone the things I had intended to do. Therefore, my life was unmanageable. And an unmanageable life to me is just that simple. Now, if my life was unmanageable, I need to manage it. And you told me about that manager in step 2. Now, if my life was unmanageable and I need to manage it, it made sense I turned my life and will over to this manager. And that's what you told me to do in step 3. Now, I knew that before this God I did not understand was going to move in my house and live with me, I had to first clean it up. And I remembered that just this is what you told me in steps 4 through 10. But let me back up. I got in bed and slept soundly. Now, wino like me don't sleep soundly. Until around 6 or 6:30 that morning. I went to the back door of the person who was letting me stay in this apartment and asked if I might call David. And I called him, told him something had happened I didn't understand. Would he come over and talk to me? And he came and he sat down on the end of that little old brass bed. And he told me many things about David. I'm sure he had told me many of these things previously, but I hadn't heard them. But most importantly, I told David many things about Franklin that I had never told another human being. And David said 2 words which, in my opinion, saved my life. He said, I understand. No one had ever told me they understood. And I knew that he did by the look in his eyes. I knew David understood. And then he said something else, said, they are going to get some of your time. Now, he is talking about the men in blue down to the local Bastille. And 2 days later, they did capture me. But he gave me some instructions there, some directions. He said, you get down on your knees every morning, and as many times during the day as you can. And you tell God the truth. You tell him you don't understand him, but you want to. But you have a lot of friends that do have a working arrangement with him, and they have told you and will tell you how to do this, and that you are willing to do it. And you tell God that you're going to report for duty every day, and for him to show you and tell you what to do and give you the strength and the courage to do it. I said, David, I don't believe that. He said, it don't make a darn whether you believe it or not. He said, there's not a thing in the world in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, says that you have to believe. You come to believe. And says, if you do this long enough, you will come to believe. And he told me the 2 most important things about prayer is first, start doing it, and secondly, keep on doing it. And said, if you do this, you will come to believe. And I have found that to be true. Certainly it has been true in my life, and it's been true in the lives of many, many others with whom I have talked. So they took me to the Penal Farm, and I tried to sober up everybody out there. First, I asked the warden if we could start a group. He said he'd like for us to. So he knew David. I asked him if he'd call David, let me talk to him. And he did, and David, 2 others came out that Saturday, and we started a AA group. And that group is still there. And I've been privileged to go out there many times. And it does me good, especially when they clang that door behind me after I'm on the outside. Because I know the ring of that steel from the inside. So I got out when I was supposed to and not before. I couldn't be bonded, and it was a long time before I could get a job. And I hung around sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous all my waking hours. And a lot of it, most of it, I'd say, was with David. I finally got a job. In the meantime, I was going to all AA meetings that I could get to. So I got active in my group, in the Quonset group. And I got to be president of the group. They didn't call it president, but I considered that I was president of the group. I owned the group. And I studied that big book. I thought I worked the steps, and I still think I worked them to the best of my ability at that time. I just didn't have enough ability. I didn't have enough honesty, void of self-deception. So I went along for a period of between 9 and 10 years, and I talk about this to remind myself, and also if there's someone in this room that after a certain period of being in Alcoholics Anonymous, that you seem to be backsliding, having a lot of self-pity, resentments, and all of this. Well, this happened to me somewhere between 9 and 10 years. My boss wasn't running the business right. He wouldn't listen to the advice I gave him. Eloise and Mickey wasn't doing the right things, and I couldn't do anything with them. I'd bring a new person to the Quonset group, and they wouldn't let me talk. And some little cat with 3 months sobriety would get him over there and start talking to him. I'd go over there and jerk him away and say, if you want to know anything about this program, you come to me. I've been sober over 9 years. I was in real bad shape. David had me to come to the meetings until he died, at least an hour early, and we'd stay at least an hour afterwards. And I think with me, the meetings before the meetings and the meetings after the meetings are the most important meetings I ever went to. So I got on there early that night, and I said, David, I've got to talk to you. He said, I know it. He said, I've been trying to approach you for several weeks, but you had a wall built up there that I couldn't get through. He says, I've been praying to God that you'd either come to me or somebody else and get this out in the open and do something about it before you got drunk. He said, God has answered my prayer. So I unloaded on David. He says, can you stay sober from now until Saturday? That is on Monday. I said, I can keep from drinking, but I'll be a long way from sober. He said, that's nothing new. But says, if you'll do what I tell you to do between now and Saturday, you won't drink. Says, you go home, and you may think this is bad information. He says, you go home and don't go to another meeting this week. And I said, David, you always wanted me to go to meetings. He said, not this time. Got something else for you to do. He said, every waking hour, you get that textbook of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you read and study and reread and restudy and reread and restudy that doctor's opinion until you are thoroughly convinced. See, that doctor's opinion told me what the nature of my illness is, and it also told me what the solution is. And I learned from that I wasn't a bad person trying to get good, but I was a sick person trying to get well. And I had missed all of this in those first 9 and a half years. And then he says, I want you to read, study, and restudy and restudy the first 4 chapters. And he said, do you know why I want you to do this? I said, no. He said, turn to the ABCs in the 5th chapter, which was read so beautifully up here, and read me the next few words. And it says, being convinced, you're ready for step 3. David said, convinced of what? Then he said of the ABCs. He said, what are the ABCs? He said, they are purely and simply the first two steps. He said, nowhere in the big book or any AA literature does it tell you how to take the first two steps. You don't take them. You become convinced of them by studying the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. And I believe that. So he said, after you do that, we'll go out on the lake Saturday. So we did. And I don't know whether anybody in the sponsors ever done this with anybody else, but David did with me. He'd give me assignments, and I'd have to study them, and then he'd give me a test on them. And if I didn't answer them to his satisfaction, I'd have to go back and repeat it. So he said, we are all right now on the first 2 steps. He said, let's get on to the 3rd step. So he had me to read what to do. And you know, after 9.5 years, or approximately 9.5 years, I hadn't seen that Bill suggested that we take the 3rd step with another human being. Neither had I seen where Bill suggested that we offer a certain prayer. And David said, let's do this thing right. So I took the 3rd step with David. And then he had me to read the 3rd step prayer, and after I read it, he said, let's kneel down here. He said, alcoholics, real alcoholics, get on their knees. So we got on our knees, and I said the 3rd step prayer, and this is about what I said. And what I say now, God, I offer myself to thee to do with me and build with me as thy will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, so that victory over them may bear witness to those that I might help. For thy love, thy service, and thy way of life, may I always do thy will. I looked down at David, and tears were running down his cheeks. And tears were running down my cheeks. And I embraced David, and I told him I loved him. The first male in my life that I ever told that I loved. And I really did love David. So he said, we all right up to now. I think I know where your problem is. Said, I gave you a legal pad to write your 4th step on. And then after about 2 weeks, I asked you to show me what you were doing. And said you had started on a life history, and you lied. And I tore it up and showed you how to do it according to the book. And then you didn't take the 5th step with me. You took it with a professional man. And I know why you did, because you could lie to him and you couldn't lie to me. It says, now we're going to do this thing according to the big book. And David told me, and I believe this, I believe writing a life history as a 4th step is worse than taking no 4th step at all. Because I think with me, it brought out these old deeds and brought them to surface, and there was more guilt involved. Bill says that we need to get on to causes and effects. And in the format, in the big book, we find out what caused us to do this, what was the effect on it, and what was the end result of the emotion that was affected. So he had me to turn to the format on page 65. Oh yeah, he says, do you know why you need to take the 4th step? I said, no, I know what the book says. He said, well, this ain't in the big book, but you need to know it. You need to take the 4th step so you can take the 5th. Said, there ain't no way to take the 5th without taking the 4th. He said, turn to page 72 and 73 and read me down at the bottom of page 72 and top of 73. And it says, those who do not take this vital step, the 5th step, do not relieve their alcoholism. Invariably, they drink again. They haven't learned enough of honesty, fearlessness, and humility by telling it all to another human being. And the word all is in italics. And David said when something's in italics, it's important. And it means tell it all. So he said, now let's get back. So he had me to find the 3 areas of my life to examine in the 5th chapter. Resentments, number 1. Fears and sex. And he said, you put each one of these 3 headings at the top of 3 separate pages, and then we'll go from there. Said it's going to take more than 1 page for your resentments, because you told me a lot of them. And when you'd get drunk, a lot of these resentments would come out. So I remember those and said, we're going to do this thing right. So at the top of on page 65, it says, I resent Mr. Brown. Why? Because of his attentions to my wife. What effect does this have on me? It affects my security and it affects my sex relations. What is the end result? A little four-letter word in parenthesis out there, fear. That's the emotion that I wound up as a thing that affected me. He said, now, before we go any further, I said, I don't know whether Bill knew this when he wrote the big book or whether he learned it from the time he wrote the big book in the 12 and 12. But said it's really important and it's the greatest tool that you can use in doing the fourth step. Said, turn to the explanation of step 4 in your 12 and 12 and read me in the first paragraph what the 3 God-given instincts are. And I say this without any fear of contradiction. This is the greatest tool that we have for finding out what's wrong with us. These 3 God-given instincts are an instinct for sex, an instinct for material and emotional security, and an instinct for companionship. It goes on to say that these are good because they're God-given. But where you and I get into trouble is in abusing or threatening one or more of the God-given instincts. So we went back to that format. I resent Mr. Brown. Why? Because his attention to my wife. What effect does it have on me? It affects the first God-given instinct, sex. It affects the first part of the second God-given instinct, emotional security. And it affects the third God-given instinct, companionship. I went all the way down the line listing my resentments, and in every case, one or more of the 3 God-given instincts were affected, and the end result was fear. I listed the people that I had harmed under the resentments. I listed my character defects. And I found out that character defects were really poison. On page 51 in the old 12 and 12, I don't know what page it's on in the new 12 and 12 because I don't have one. It says character defects representing instincts gone astray. See some more of those instincts. Being the primary cause of our drinking and our failure at life. That's a powerful statement. Character defects representing instincts gone astray being the primary cause of our drinking and failure at life. And unless we are willing to work hard toward the elimination of the worst of these, both sobriety and peace of mind will elude us. He said that's the reason that you need to take a complete 4th and 5th step. So I went on with that 4th step. I listed the character defects, and I listed how they affected me, what caused them, and how they affected me. And I found that in every instance, everything led back to selfishness and self-centeredness. All right, in the 12 and 12, it says we eat more, we drink more, and we grasp for more of everything than we need, fearing we shall never get enough. Now, what is that but trying to satisfy a human ego? So what did I find out about old Franklin in the 4th step? I found out that my real problem is ego, and the end result is fear. And that's why I can better understand that 7 of our steps have to do with deflation of ego. And that's why I can better understand that a spiritual program is the only solution for a spiritual illness. Now I can understand these things by David giving me directions and keeping things simple and teaching me to somewhat keep them simple. So I went on and listed my fears, what caused them, what is the end result. And then I went on to sex, the same deal, and we don't talk much about sex in AA, and I think we need to talk more about it because, as Bill has in the 12 and 12, that we all have problems in this area. He has it in the big book too. And what we need to do, or what I needed to do, was examine my motive and to pray. See, there's a whole lot more praying in this deal than I knew there was for a period of 9.5 years. Because I came to you professing to be an agnostic. I don't know whether I was or not, but it gave me an excuse to drink. So I had a block against this for a long time. So David said, we all right now. Said, you go home and you complete this 4th step. And then when you finish it, said, we'll go out on the lake and we'll take the 5th step. So we did. And David did something with me which I do with the people with whom I take a 5th step. He took his with me. Certainly that part of his that related to mine. And this helped me because it showed me that there was another human being that thought and acted like I did, and I was not alone, and I was not unique in this area. So then after I took the 5th step with him, he told me, sit down over there and read what to do. And it tells me to go back to my room and get in a quiet place and thank God that I know him better. Some more praying. And to review the first 5 proposals, the first 5 steps, and see if I've left out anything to add it. And then if I hadn't, that I was ready for steps 6 and 7. Page 76 in the big book explains 4 steps on it, and it don't take a whole lot of explaining. So in the 6th and the 7th step, become entirely ready. And the book tells me more praying. Pray for willingness to have them removed. And then, after I become willing, to humbly ask him to remove my shortcomings. And there's a prayer there, and David had me to read that prayer and to offer it. God, I am now willing that you take all of me, the good and the bad. Remove every single defect of character which stands in my way of my usefulness to you and to my fellows. May I always do thy bidding. Now, this may be controversial, but I think this is what happened with me. I don't think God removed my defects of character. I don't have them today to the degree that I have. Most importantly, I can recognize what a character defect is, and then you've taught me what to do in order to get rid of it. How long do I get rid of it? I may get rid of it 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 days, 2 weeks. But it comes back. And the only reason that it comes back is because my ego returns. And my ego returns because I haven't gotten as honest, void of self-deception as I need to get. I think what God has done has afforded me the opportunity to practice the opposite of that character defect. For instance, I don't think God's going to do anything for me I can do for myself. This is my opinion. Instead of self-pity, there's no way I can have self-pity if I'm practicing gratitude. And so on down the list. I can't be intolerant if I'm tolerant, and so on. So I think this is what's happened to me. I don't think my obsession to drink's been removed. I think it's been replaced. Today I have an obsession to stay sober that's stronger than any obsession that I have to drink. And as long as I have that obsession to stay sober and apply these principles, the 12 steps, to my life, I won't have the obsession to drink. And I know all of you know what an obsession is, an idea that overpowers any other idea, and I can't have but one obsession at a time, and thank God today it's an obsession to stay sober and not drink. So then the book tells me, I hear people say, I don't know when to take certain steps. They don't read the big book. It tells you in there when to do it. All you got to do is keep this thing simple and follow directions. So it told me in steps 8 and 9 that I made a list of the people that I'd harmed in step 4, and I did. More praying. Pray for willingness to make amends. There were some amends I didn't want to make. And my sponsor told me that I would either make them or I would drink again. And I didn't want to drink, so I made them. It bothered me for a long time. I couldn't make amends to my father because he'd been dead a number of years. But Chuck taught me that being willing was sufficient, that I would have made amends if I possibly could. So I don't have any guilt in that area today. Then continued to take a personal inventory, and when wrong, promptly admitted it. Promptly sometimes with me can be 10 days, 2 weeks, depending on how badly I hurt. Pain is the thing that's motivated me to do everything that's been beneficial to me. And if I hurt badly enough, I'm going to do something about it. Some people say that you can take the first 9 steps and forget about them, and then do the last 3. I don't know where they get that. The book don't say it. You know, there's a lot of much bad information floating around AA as there is good information. And I think a sponsor needs to know what he's talking about, because we are dealing with lives with a terminal illness, and we can kill that alcoholic by giving him the wrong information. And I think they need to do as David did and as I try to do. Not just tell them, but turn to the book and have them to read it. And then they know that it's coming from the proper source, and they'll recognize all this garbage when they go to some other meeting and hear all that crazy jazz. I'm a big book nut. And David, thank God, he got me started in that big book and made me continue in that big book. And that's where my solution is. And I don't want to forget that. So sought through talking and listening to God to improve my conscious contact and praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry it out. Meditation today is real important in my life. And I had a hard time meditating in the beginning. I could start off on something and I'd wind up way over yonder 1,000 miles. I couldn't control things. And David had me to read in the 12 and 12 what Bill said about meditation. And evidently Bill saw that other people had this problem. And what he suggested was to take a good prayer and examine that prayer. And then to examine yourself as to where you are as opposed to the person in that prayer. And the prayer that he suggested is St. Francis of Assisi's prayer. To me, it's the greatest prayer that I ever heard. And that's the one that I use. I'll start off with my 6 words, trust God, clean house, and help others. And then I get into this deal. Now, I don't do that every day. Some days I have some physical problems, and I have to spend a lot of time in a recliner. At least I spend a lot of time in a recliner. And I've got a recorder there. I got the 12 and 12. I got the big book. I got tapes. And then maybe I'll open that book just at random, and I'll read a few lines or maybe a paragraph, something to get me started to thinking. And I get to thinking about old Chuck and many others and what this program has done. And I'm really awed at the power that's in this program, the power. I can't understand it because I'm not big enough. If I could understand it, I'd be as big as God. But I'm really, really awed at it. David had me to look up words, and he had me to look up believe. And one of the definitions of to believe is to rely. And I am coming to rely on the forgiveness of God for yesterday and the grace of God for tomorrow. And that only leaves me today. And there's nothing, I mean nothing, that can come up in my life today that can't be handled if I turn it over to God. How do I know this? Because I've tried it. Why did I try it? Because my sponsor told me to. And he had me to read in the big book where Bill says that the problem ahead is never greater than the power behind. The problem ahead is never greater than the power behind. I have another way of putting that. There's no limit to where I can go in this program because I will never run out of God. And that's a comforting thought to me. I'll never run out of God. And I know this at a gut level. And I'm real glad that you taught me this in this program. You know, talk about life and will. David told me that everything in the 3rd step would change except the decision. He says your life and will change and your understanding of God will change. I didn't know what my life and will was. Today I know what it is. My life is my actions and my will is my thinking. And I found out that there's no way that I can think myself into proper acting. I have to act myself into proper thinking. And my understanding of God today is different from what it was a year ago. Hopefully a year from now it'll be greater than it is now. And it will if I'll continue to pray for willingness to become more honest and to have the strength and the courage to do these things that you have shown me to do. Having had a spiritual awakening, this scared the stew out of me in the beginning. I said, David, that's too churchy. So he said, turn to the appendix 2 in the back of the book. And he had me to read. Now, that's what I think a sponsor is supposed to do. What I try to do. To read what a spiritual awakening is. And it says it's purely and simply a personality change sufficient to relieve my alcoholism. Well, I could understand that. See, he gave me something simple. He knew I'd had a lot of trouble with what we call the God angle. So he said, read on down at the end of that appendix. And then there was another simple thing. It says, many of our members suspect that an unsuspected power has entered our lives, which we can identify as a power greater than ourselves. The mere essence of this is, in effect, a spiritual awakening. I knew that some power had entered my life that I could identify as a power greater than myself. And it put it down on a real simple basis, and it had gotten away from those things that I had programmed myself or was programmed, I don't know which, by church people. This is a real simple program, hard but simple. And I almost missed it because it's a doggone simple. Practice these principles in all our affairs, that's hard for me to do. It's not as hard now as it used to be. It's mighty easy for me to be a good person at AA meeting. But to take this program home and practice in my home was real difficult for a long time. It's no problem now. Taking it to my wake in all of my affairs. And that's what this deal is all about. And I'll only mention one principle. Of course, the principles they're talking about are the 12 steps. But I'll only mention love. I think that's the apex of all religions, what all men of the cloth are trying to get across to us and what the carpenter was trying to get across to us. I think love is the greatest force on this universe. And I've been around you people long enough to see and experience the miraculous healing power of love. The people in the concert group love this old drunk sober. And that's the only way that I can see it. Tote this message. What message do we tote? There's only one message to tote, according to what the 12 steps says. A spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. I don't have any message to carry about how you deal with your political affairs, your legal affairs, your financial affairs, your sex affairs, your marital affairs. The only thing I am authorized to tote to you is a spiritual awakening as a result of me having taken the first 12 steps. And I think that's all any member of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only message he had. I wish I had said this, but I didn't. And I'll have to give credit to the person who did say it, old Joe M.C. from down in Little Rock, Arkansas. One of the best AAs I know. He said the greatest carrier of a message was Paul Revere. Said Paul Revere rode through the countryside yelling, the British are coming. The British are coming. Never one time did Paul stop and get on off his horse and tell them, now if I was you, I'd do this about your marital problem. No, he carried a simple message. Now, they could have sent Benjamin Franklin, but Benjamin Franklin was a philosopher, and he'd have still been there giving them advice, and we'd be British subjects. They sent a simple silversmith to carry a simple message. Now, Joe didn't say this, I say this. The message took care of itself. When Paul Revere told them that the British are coming, them cats knew to haul ass. So, our message will take care of itself if we stick to the message. I'll close with my football story that I always do. It's really not much of a story. I just like the way I tell it. and I hadn't heard it today, so if you'll bear with me. I just like to think that the God of my understanding is saying unto me this Sunday afternoon that I'm going to get up a football team and I'm going to make you the quarterback. And I'm going to give you 3 men in the backfield that you lost during the active alcoholism, and I'm going to give them back to you in the reverse order in which you lost them. I'm going to give you hope, faith, and charity. In the line, I'm going to give you 7 powerful men that you were introduced to in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you'll use these men, they'll block out resentment, self-pity, intolerance, impatience, all of the stumbling blocks that caused you so much trouble the first 45 years of your life. At the 2 ends, I'm going to give you honesty and humility. The 2 tackles, honesty and patience. And the 2 guards, unselfishness and gratitude. And at center, willingness. Now, it'll be necessary that you use willingness on every play. This game is going to last a lifetime, and I'm not only your coach, I'm the sole official. And any decision I make shall be final. So I'm going to have to give you some ground rules. And the ground rules are the 10 Commandments. The first 4 of these have to do with your relationship with your manager and your coach and the referee God. And the last 6 have to do with your relationship with your teammates. Now, the ball is your eternal soul. The goalpost are the gates of heaven. Now get in there and play ball. I need each and every one of you in my search for truth in this game of life. And I thank God for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it was my manager God that directed me to you. And it was you that taught me of a God of my understanding. And if you don't believe that this program will work, just keep it simple and follow directions. And if you don't believe that God will help you, just ask Him. Thank you, and God bless you, and I love you.